Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of Half History Will Travel. I am your host, the Wilder Historian, and this video dives into the secession winter of 1860 to 1861 that resulted in many of the southern slaveholding states leaving the Union, and Andrew Jackson's influence on the secession debate that took place during that period of time. The information gathered for this video comes from the article entitled Patriot Slaveholder, Andrew Jackson and the Winter of Secession by Aaron Scott Crawford. If you want to know more or read the article for yourself, I will include the title and author in the description. Charles Sumner, the senator from Massachusetts who had been beaten with a cane by Congressman Preston Brooks just a few years prior, arose on December 10, 1860, 10 days before South Carolina seceded from the Union, and delivered an address to the Senate. He read a letter to his fellow senators. It stated, "I have had a laborious task here, but nullification is dead, and its actors and couriers will only be remembered by the people to be execrated for their wicked designs to sever and destroy the only good government on the globe." When he finished, Sumner revealed that those words were the words of the former president, Andrew Jackson, who had died 15 years prior. Jackson had dealt with his own crisis similar to what the Union was experiencing in 1860. South Carolina attempted to nullify federal tariff laws when that state asserted that it possessed the power to accept or reject federal law. It brought into question federal authority over the states. Did state governments have that much power to pick and choose which federal law it abided by? Andrew Jackson was unquestionably against such an act and wanted to safeguard the Union from threats like nullification, which could unravel the political fabric of the country. In March 1833, Congress passed the Force Bill, giving President Jackson authority to use military force to end nullification. Before it came to military action, Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun agreed to compromise on tariff rates, thus diffusing the situation. Now, nearly 30 years later in 1860, Jackson was being uplifted as the savior of the Union during the nullification crisis, and his words were used to help illustrate what powers the federal government had if South Carolina and other states attempted to secede from the Union. Crawford explained, "Between the election of Lincoln and his inauguration, Congress discussed secession and its consequences. During those debates, Jackson's name appeared regularly, with each political faction picking his bones for useful scraps and tidbits. For Unionists, Jackson served as a savior, while secessionists recast him in their own image. Most congressmen focused on Jackson's nullification rhetoric while ignoring the compromise that ended that crisis. By manipulating the historical record, congressmen crafted a new image of Jackson for their own use." Sumner characterized Jackson as a patriot slaveholder, separating Jackson from the secessionist slaveholders attempting to secede. Abolitionists and Northern Democrats who moved into the Republican ranks shortly before and during the secession winter looked to Jackson as a symbol of Unionism. One stated, "When the nullifiers met the iron will and sterling patriotism of Andrew Jackson, whose Roman virtue no bribes could sway or threats subdue, while the hero lived, he checked and thwarted them. Dying, he, with a wonderful significance, enjoined his family to use the memorials of his bravery in defending the Union from domestic traitors as well as former enemies." Southern Democrats had a difficult time using Andrew Jackson for their own arguments, but that did not stop them from recasting him in their own image. Jefferson Davis of Mississippi, and soon to be one and only President of the Confederate States of America, argued that Northerners misidentified Jackson's stance and said the former president had fought an oppressive government during the American Revolution and would be in lockstep with the Southern states as they left the Union. Although Jackson was a young boy when he was in the Revolution, secessionists used that image of Jackson to back up their stance. Secessionists saw the secession crisis and the Civil War as a second American Revolution, and used Andrew Jackson and George Washington's service in the American Revolution as a defense against accusations of treason. Andrew Johnson, soon to be Vice President and President of the United States, stood before the Senate and invoked the name of Jackson to push for the preservation of the Union. I must say that if such a man as Andrew Jackson were President of the United States at this present time, before this moment, steps would have been taken which would have preserved us as a united people without the shedding of blood, without making war. I believe that if Andrew Jackson were President of the United States, this glorious Union of ours would be intact. I believe that this would have been the case if he had been President, pursuing the policy which I feel certain he would have pursued in such an emergency. The Southern fire eater, Louis T. Wigfall, a Texas senator, campaigned hard for secession and also used Jackson as a symbol of his cause in his rebuttal against Andrew Johnson. Now, if the senator wishes to denounce secession and nullification, let him go back and denounce Jefferson. Let him go back and denounce Jackson if he dare. General Jackson approved of the doctrine of nullification of 1798. Wigfall interpreted Jackson's support for the Republican Party of 1798 as consent for Jefferson's doctrine of nullification and thus secession. Further, he indicated that Jackson's beliefs on secession and states' rights were implicit in his Indian policy. He explained that Jackson had allowed Georgia to carry out Indian removal without the assistance, intervention, or approval of the federal government. Although Wigfall soon left the Union along with Texas, and Johnson remained despite Tennessee's secession, both considered themselves good Jacksonian Democrats. When Abraham Lincoln delivered his inaugural address on March 4, 1861, he echoed Jackson's 1832 proclamation against nullification when he stated, "The dictates of a high duty oblige me solemnly to announce that you cannot succeed. The laws of the United States must be executed. I have no discretionary power on the subject. My duty is emphatically pronounced in the Constitution." Crawford concludes that, in the secession winter of 1860-61, distorted interpretations of Jackson emerged from various sources, often bent, twisted, and out of context. In the congressional debates, Unionists attempted to shame secessionists by using the words and memory of Jackson, a slaveholder who had been an ardent American nationalist rather than a Southern nationalist. In the end, Lincoln, an anti-Jackson Whig, ultimately eclipsed Old Hickory by demonstrating a resolve and commitment to the Union far greater than Jackson's real or imagined accomplishments. Quite simply, Lincoln became a more heroic figure than Jackson himself.
Historian, historian, where do you roam? Historian, historian, far, far from home. Have history will travel reads the card of a man, a professor with knowledge in the hard land. To educate the world is his mission. A professor of fortune is a man called historian. Historian.